Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40k lore, where today we're going to talk about something a pinch more esoterical. Reverse engineering in 40k, specifically in relations to the Imperium, because, well, the Imperium of Man are pretty much the only ones who would actively engage in and benefit from large-scale reverse engineering. Which sounds silly. You'd think that everybody would have something to learn from someone, but, you know, the Eldar, for example, their tech is supremely advanced already, and tends to focus around psychically active items and Wraithbone. They'll have very little use of anything Imperial. The Necrons are literally the most advanced species in the entire galaxy, so they don't give a fig. The Tau are the second most advanced in the galaxy, and already are advancing their own tech at breakneck speed, so the Orcs? Dark Eldar? Turnits. Yeah, no, the Imperium really is one of the only major forces out there that would have a genuine interest and benefit in actively reverse engineering the tech of the various other races they come across, and also reverse engineering their own tech. And there's a big point as well. Since from what little we know of the golden age of technology, humanity was once unfathomably technologically advanced, perhaps even to a point that would rival that of the Eldar or maybe even the Necrons, if you're looking at some certain sources. Bearing in mind here, we are moving into Black Library territory now, which means a lot of this is of dubious canonical integrity. And in fact, before we go any further, let me lay out a few points here. A lot of what we know about reverse engineering comes from a handful of sources, since it's not a very large topic in 40k at all. In fact, back in the day, 40k was in many ways a much darker setting than it is now. With Belisarius Cole and his special snowflake marines, we've actually been seeing a tremendous amount of technological innovation happening in 40k overnight. Practically. In fact, it was going so goddamn fast that GW decided that they had to throw in a 100-year time skip with the Indominus Crusade just to not make it too obvious that they were advancing the Imperium in leaps and bounds so quickly. I mean... Oh god, I don't want to get into Cole here, but just to give you an example here, before Cole, the Adepts Astartes were basically the height of Imperial tech when it came to a regular fighting force. Their power armor, their weaponry, their very creation was the bleeding edge of an empire that had stagnated 10,000 years ago. Now, that is beyond yesterday's news. As we've improved upon the Space Marines, we've improved upon their armor, we've improved upon their guns, we've improved upon their tanks. Hell, Cole has even created a AI, a fully functioning artificial intelligence in the form of Cole Inferior. Which is a plot hole beyond the... I'm not going to get into it. No. Moving on. The point has been made. We have seen some rather rapid advances, and in large part this is because of, well, plot. Let's not beat around the bush here. GW has waved their magic wands, and a lot of very strange things have happened very quickly. This is kind of referencing back to the God Emperor video I made a little while ago. But I'm not here to whinge about that today. I'll probably do it at some point, but the point is, 40k was an extraordinarily stagnant universe where all human technological advances were not invented. They were not based on innovation or creation. They were based on the rediscovery of old tech. Primarily, this was the rediscovery of STC, Standard Template Constructs, which the Mechanicum could then look at and go like, okay, we now have a de facto blueprint, or a part of a blueprint, to create a machine. And half the time, they wouldn't even know what the machine did until they finally built it. A process that could take decades or even centuries, depending upon the resources of the Magos in question, as the Mechanicus tend to not want to share this kind of stuff, and also dependent upon how complete the blueprint was. Even with a fully completed STC construct blueprint, a step-by-step guide how to create something, it might still take decades of ritualistic prayers and nonsense and sacred oils and unguents and yada yada yada. And if there are gaps in the blueprint, it would take even longer. Alright, I know what 98% of this, but there's a thing over here that I don't know what is. Okay, well, what are we going to do then? Well, we'll try to figure out roughly what that part may have done, and then we'll just cram in some other piece of tech we've got. Maybe it was a power generator. Alright, shove one of those in there and see what happens. Maybe it was some kind of automated feed system. Right, cram that in. Occasionally this would end with large explosions, but on other occasions it would actually create something functional. And when it did, that would be a technological innovation. That would be a breakthrough when we finally figured out how to use a piece of tech we had long forgotten about. Now, already there are elements of reverse engineering, kind of, but not really inherent within this process. Let's take the example of we've got a 90% finished STC, but we're lacking one piece. In a modern day scenario, we might then look at the machine itself and go, okay, what is it missing? How can we logically intuit what that missing piece is? What do we not have? Well, we know that this requires lubricant. Do we have lubricant? We do. We know this requires power. Do we have power? We do. And so on and so on. You would break down the function of the machine to figure out the function of the missing part. This is not how the Mechanicus would do it, at the very least not as a first resort. Instead, they would take the blueprint and they would compare it to every other blueprint they have, everything else they had, every other machine they have, and they might even just simply begin trying, one after the other, to try and figure out what slots neatly into that position. Instead of trying to intuit what is needed, they just start looking for things that might fit. This is why the Mechanicus is so excited for finding even a piece of an STC, even just a fragment of a much greater machine, because you never know, it could be the thing that slots into a thing that has been under quote-unquote development for hundreds of years. We have examples of this in the lore where they find just the right piece that now fits into this machine that completes another far greater machine again. Of course, there are exceptions. There are Maguses and up-and-coming tech priests that try to apply more of a scientific method to things. Because there's another thing as well. The Adeptus Mechanicus is very much so a religion first, rather than a technocracy or a technologic and scientifically focused organization. They believe, the vast majority of tech priests at least do believe, that they put the sacred unguents on the cog, therefore the cog spins. They don't think that, okay, the cog is clearly dry as a bone and therefore has gotten jammed in with the other cog. I need to apply lubricants so that the cogs can turn smoothly. Instead, they simply again think, alright, well, it's stopped because I haven't applied the sacred unguents. The unguents don't work because they're lubricants, the unguents works because they're the sacred unguents, and once applied, the cog will then choose to turn. But even within this framework, there is room for innovation and logical thinking, and this is where we get to that tech heresy front, because a tech priest who says, I disagree, I actually think the cog turns because of lubricant, he is a tech heretic and is going to be shot very, very quickly. However, a tech priest that says, yes, you are correct, brother, but what part of the sacred unguent is it that causes the machine to turn the gears? What part of the sacred unguent is sacred? And then you might think, alright, well, it's the lubricant part. So maybe we can take out the cow dung part or whatever other nonsense the Mechanicum has added to it. I'm using a very simplified example here, but in this example, the tech priest has identified that yes, it is the sacred unguent that makes the wheel go round, but maybe there is a way to make this process more effective. Maybe the sacred unguent is not as perfect as it could be. He is seeking to iterate on the process whilst also making sure that it is delivered in socially acceptable verbiage. And sometimes this kind of piece-by-piece iterative innovation will lead to relatively sizable breakthroughs, although again it will take a very, very, very long time and be very, very, very experimental for a very, very, very long time. And hey, even coming up with the thing, that isn't the end of the struggle to get it actually accepted. It's almost kind of like the dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy. Even if a Magi was able to invent a new weapon, he would then have to explain how he invented it in acceptable terms, and then also have it be accepted by the rest of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Either by having it officially recognized as, an STC in and of itself or a lost piece of technology. The priest could, for example, simply go, okay, I took A, B, and C, and I combine them together to make the D. And the D is very devastating. Therefore, you should accept that the D is fine and a blessed part of the omnissiah's greater scheme. But that raises the interesting question, doesn't it? Where do they get the A, B, and the C from? Well, it's not always just the taking of various pieces of already existing STCs, although that is the majority of the innovation. Sometimes a particularly radical priest might begin moving towards figuring out how something works, irrespective of whether or not it already exists somewhere else. So, to simplify things yet again, you've got a machine and it's made up of 3 components. You know 2 of these components because they're already existing STCs. You know where they are, you know how to make them, you know how they function to the extent that the Mechanicus knows how anything functions, and you can slot those into other things. But the 3rd component is undiscovered. It is perhaps unique to this STC, nobody has ever seen it before, and since it now functions, nobody decides to ask too many questions. A particularly innovative Magus might look at that and go, alright, I am going to try and figure out how that 3rd component works. Now, that is going to require quite a lot of hocus pocus in and of itself, because there is no way any Magus, no matter how high ranked, is going to be allowed to pick apart a functioning STC. There's the first hurdle. The second one is to get a hold of the part without inquiring too much suspicion, which might require actually finding just that part somewhere else and then not telling anyone about it. But assuming you actually can get a hold of a thing that you can pick apart without anybody noticing or caring, you can then actually begin the reverse engineering process. Now, the way we do it in reality is we take the thing, and then we slowly begin picking apart each individual component one by one, whilst drawing out and creating a complex schematic to explain where everything fits together, so that you know exactly what is attached to what, and you can then begin to extrapolate the meaning of these various things. Once you have the whole thing drawn out, you can then begin making some educated guesses. Okay, I know that this is a battery, because I know what a battery is. And when the energy goes from point A to point B, it lessens. Okay, so I know therefore that the component in between these 2 spots must somehow lessen the energy being passed through or regulate it. Right, now I can begin looking at that component and figuring out how it does that. And you need to do this every single step of the way for every part that you don't understand. And the aim is that at the end of this long and intricate process, which is half educated guesswork and the other half straight up detective work, you should hopefully be able to explain how each and every one of the intricate pieces works together one by one by one. And when you know what each and every part does, you can come up with a pretty damn good theory and hypothesis of what the entire thing does, and you can also explain precisely how it does it, because you can go, okay, A does B, that does C, that does D, etc., etc. You now know the complex structure and the rationale behind its functionality. But that is modern day reverse engineering. How do you do this if you genuinely believe that half of this, if not more, is straight up magic and, well, deity worship? From the very few sources we have available on this subject, it includes, as you probably already expected, a great deal of rituals. The thing being reverse engineered must be prayed to frequently, loudly and vehemently. Every single nut, every bolt, everything removed needs its own prayer, and you then need to identify the correct prayer to do the correct thing with the, well, just a screw. Imagine you've got a case that is covering a thing and you need to unscrew the case. Well, there might be different prayers for every single one of the screws, depending upon the size of the screw, depending upon the tools you need to loosen the screw, depending upon the stages on unscrewing the screw, and so on. Imagine the most drawn out, lengthy, pointless process you can think of, and you're probably still only halfway there. And what happens, do you think, when they run into a component that they don't recognize? Well, that's when it starts getting really fun. Because now you've got to reverse engineer a part of the thing that you're already trying to reverse engineer, whilst not understanding what the thing you're reverse engineering even does, much less its component parts. Let's take a fairly simple example, right? A resistor. Odds are the Adeptus Mechanicus knows what a resistor is, as in they know what happens when they apply one to a thing. Much like they know what electricity is, as in they know that when they generate it and pump it into a machine, a thing happens. But do they know what electricity is, as in it being tiny charged electron particles inside of atoms? And do they understand how that structure affects how electricity functions? Probably not. And without that knowledge, it's going to be very difficult to figure out exactly why and how a resistor works without, well, basically trial and error. Now, as we know, a resistor functions essentially by acting like a bottleneck of sort. It creates a connection where it controls the amount of electricity that is allowed to flow through it by varying the thickness and the length of copper coils inside of it. How do I put this? Think of like a pipe, a steel pipe that you've got water running through it, right? The bigger the pipe, the more water you can push through the pipe. But if you start adding stuff inside the pipe, like little parts, or you just fill it with rocks or something, there'll still be water going through the pipe, but there'll be a lot less water. That is basically how a resistor works. But unless you know, again, how electricity works, how are you going to envision this in your mind? Well, a tech priest might take the resistor and slowly, carefully begin peeling away at it. Oh hell, at first he might look at it and go, well, you see the little lines painted on it. That's what creates the difference in electricity. So I've got this much at the beginning and this much at the end, and it's because it's painted. These are holy symbols, you see. And hey, that might work if they've got other resistors, because they can look at the resistors and go like, okay, this has got the same holy symbols, therefore it's going to do the same thing. But at some point, somebody is going to go, all right, well, I'll just make one of these. And it just paints the holy symbols on a thing and puts it in place and goes, why doesn't it work? At which point, okay, the priest might return to the drawing board and might begin slowly scraping away at the insulating layer, and then he sees inside of it and goes, hold on, there's a bunch of stuff in here. Maybe it's not just the holy coloring, maybe it's the holy coloring and the metal inside. Oh, now I'm starting to understand. Then maybe he just plunks in a solid piece of copper or whatever other metal, and again, it doesn't create the desired result. Alright, so it's not enough with the painting, and it's not enough with the metal, so there's clearly some ritual I have missed out on here. Well, if I go even deeper into it, I can actually see that the copper is meshed, it's wire wound. Aha! There we go. This is the ritual that's required. It needs to be covered like this to actually produce the effect. There you have it. Now I have the ritual. I've got the metal, I've got the wire mesh, I've got the wire wound around it, and then I add on the sacred paint. And now you've created a resistor. But of course, again, this is going to be a much longer process, and you still haven't figured out the precise reason why the resistor works the way it does, or why it looks the way it does. You have simply tried, tested, failed, and then tried again until you have managed to replicate the result without understanding the things going on. You've managed to recreate it, but you've gained no further understanding of the phenomenon. This is Imperial reverse engineering in a nutshell. They will get a thing, they will turn the thing on, and they will figure out, okay, the thing does this. Right, now we begin working our way back from that, and we try to figure out what parts are put together to make the thing do the thing. They don't really seek to figure out the exact reason why, or to extrapolate the logic behind it. Instead, they seek merely to replicate the effect created. And depending on how deep they need to go, they wouldn't necessarily need to reverse engineer the whole thing. If they've got a component that does the same thing, they might throw it in there, even if it isn't quite the correct component, and even if it doesn't actually create quite the same effect. So long as they can still turn on the machine and get the same result, that'll be good enough. This, of course, also, as I'm sure you've already noticed, introduces a great deal of weaknesses to the process of reverse engineering. Because even if you figured out how a thing works, you haven't actually figured out how it works. You have merely figured out what kind of components you need to place in what kind of order to replicate that effect. You haven't learned really anything. You still don't know why that order is important beyond it being of ritualistic significance. You still don't know why the phenomenon is being created. You simply know that 1 + 1 = 2 without having any kind of representation of what 1 and 1 even is. All you know is that it creates the desired effect. This in turn means that the knowledge gained cannot be used easily for anything else. If you knew why a resistor functions the way it does because of electricity, you can then begin to think, alright, but if that's the case, I can make a much larger resistor, because the only real determining factor here is the size of the wire, the amount of the wire, and the length of the wire. I can scale this up and down as much as I want because I understand the underlying principles. But to a tech priest, they would probably never even think of trying to scale it up or down, because they don't look at the wound metal wire and think that's the reason. They simply think, okay, it functions in this precise way and only in this precise way. They have no frame of reference to say that it would totally function the same way if scaled up, because again, they don't know the nature of the electricity flowing through it. This means that they can create certain things by combining other things together. Let's, for example, take a simple weapon system, right? You find a bullet and it contains what looks like a form of gunpowder, to take a hyper simplistic example, but it's not quite the same gunpowder as the one you're used to. In fact, it seems to burn faster and more effectively and produce more energy, but it contains the exact same amount of grains. Alright, this is something interesting. Now I can analyze the contents of this bullet, and I go, aha, it isn't actually the gunpowder I know, because it's got a new component. And I know this component, but nobody's ever thought of putting it in bullets before. And now that I know that this component burns better than what we were using, this opens up a whole range of other opportunities, where I can't just necessarily put this in bullets, I can put this in artillery shells, or rockets, or grenades, etc, etc, because I recognize the prime quality is simply that it burns faster. And this recognition does not require the tech priest to know the atomic structure of the thing that makes it burn faster. Now, of course, it would be even better if they would know that as well, because then they could replicate the phenomenon and perhaps make it artificial, or apply the theories that makes it burn faster to other things you want to burn faster, bringing it far beyond the realms of just gunpowder into many other areas. But again, you get the point. This obviously severely limits what the Imperium can reverse engineer, because if they can only understand the bare basics of a thing, there's only so much you can do with reverse engineering, since you are going to require the components already in existence to replicate it. Another big hurdle to this is also the different classifications of technology. Take Tau weaponry, for example. They've got all kinds of cool tech that does, in many ways, the same as what Imperial weapons do. Tau plasma weaponry are still plasma weaponry. The thing they do is the same thing that the Imperial weaponry do, but the Tau weapons do it much better and much safer. Alright, well, there's nothing heretical about the outcome, so surely you could take a Tau rifle, reverse engineer it, and go, okay, these things do all of this together, therefore if we apply the same theory to our plasma weapons, we'd get a safer plasma weapon, right? Except you then go into it and you look at the components and you go, I don't recognize that. What is that thing? And if I don't recognize it, that means it's not human. And if it's not human, then it is heretical. It is Zeno's, and it must be rejected outright. Now, again, some of the particularly spicy-minded tech priests might then raise their hands and go, hold on a second. It looks Zeno's, yes, but if you peel away the covering here, you see inside it's a metal we recognize. Ergo, we do know what it is. It's just that those filthy blueberry assholes painted the sacred markings in a different way. Those little shits. So in theory, reverse engineering Zeno's weaponry is possible. Of course it's possible, duh, but even within the Imperium of Man, it would be theoretically possible to do this, but it would require, well, tech priests that are not particularly concerned with their reputation, first and foremost, and tech priests that are willing to delve a lot deeper into the mysteries than what is usually allowed. It's going to have to be done in high secrecy, and when it's finally presented, it is going to have to be dressed up in all the regular dogma to make it palatable to the rest of the church. Now, a particularly plot-armored individual might be able to circumvent all of this and simply go, well, it works, and if you have a problem with it, argue the point with Reboot Gilliman. But for the rest of the poor tech priests, it would be very, very difficult to ever introduce anything reverse engineered into common Imperial usage. It would take hundreds of years, a lot of lobbying, a lot of politicking, and an enormous amount of, well, good old-fashioned guesswork and trial and error. And even at the end of it all, the only thing you've really got is another combination of parts that works because they work. That can be valuable, but nowhere near as valuable as it could potentially be. So in conclusion, yes, the Imperium can reverse engineer pieces of human tech, or even potentially Zeno's tech if the Magos in question is crazy enough, or if he can somehow claim that it's actually totally human tech. It's just been held on to by the Zenos for a while or something like that. But even when they do reverse engineer something, the dogma and the approach that they are likely and almost guaranteed to take will mean that it's not a true reverse engineering process. It is more an iteration and an addition to the already existing database of components and effects that already exists. Now, this could be extrapolated and applied to many, many other things, potentially creating a little mini wave of iterative innovation, but it wouldn't allow them in all due likelihood to truly learn something completely new, to come up with a completely new concept that revolutionizes science, simply because they do not approach even the process of reverse engineering scientifically. Which in terms means that the long-term benefits of reverse engineering are actually really, really small. Since again, you don't get a good grasp of it, you will never unlock the greater secrets, the greater depths and mysteries. You will simply learn another combination of things. Which in turn actually means that what the Mechanicus is doing right now, sending out explorator fleets and trying to find new STCs, new pieces of forgotten knowledge, is probably a much better application of the Mechanicus's resources. They could try to do more large-scale reverse engineering, but due to having already bound their hands and their legs behind their backs, they are unlikely to produce anything of true worth. Meanwhile, an explorator fleet that comes across a functional STC or a part of an STC will have done what the reverse engineering process could have done, but much easier, with much less pushback and much less resistance from the wider Mechanicum. An STC blueprint will be accepted by everyone. In fact, it will be fought over. Some random tech priest's reverse engineered plasma rifle will be deeply distrusted and hated by everyone, to the point that an explorator fleet might stop by his planet and try to liberate some of that other technology from a known tech heretic. Anywho, this was a bit more of a rambly theory crafty video than straight up lore, again, due to the not particularly solid nature of what we have to deal with here. I could also, there was of course the mention also of the time-traveling AI in that certain short story, which I am not a fan of at all, by the way, which we could extrapolate on yet further to, go into just how far humanity has fallen. But one, I'm not too fond of the time-traveling AI, and two, it's just, it is a single thing, and therefore not necessarily a great basis for a wider extrapolation, in my opinion. Anywho, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for sitting through my ramblings, and I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, have a good day.